Hi guys, welcome to the next video. So before we get into the sample brief exercises, I do want to take you guys through some testing and debugging techniques. So if you do come across those AMPscript errors where you see that red notification, you do know how to debug it. You can identify what the common errors are in like a checklist and really help fix up your code. So this is something that's very useful. So anyways, quick tip again, watch this video in 1.5 times speed or quicker for faster learning. Anyways, let's get into it. So in today's video, we're going to cover a few things. Like I mentioned before, we're going to cover through some common AMPscript errors. So I have collated a list of common mistakes that people do make when writing AMPscript code. You can't avoid it. Sometimes just a silly error here and there where you type the wrong function name or you're using the wrong syntax. So we'll go through this checklist. It will really help you to debug your code. There are also some debugging techniques to really help you if the error message is too vague, which sometimes does happen. And sometimes maybe there's no error notification, but your output is incorrect, right? So the variables that you want to produce isn't what you're expecting. So there's some some techniques that you can use to really help identify where you're seeing that error. And finally, I want to take you guys through how to unit test. So in most situations when you do work at a job that requires you to build something and deploy it to the market, whether it's a journey, whether it's an email, an SMS message, you do need to have some sort of testing documentation. This testing documentation is useful in terms of holding you accountable, and there's some traceability in the fact that you've tested all these scenarios. So then when you do go live, any mistakes happen, you can trace it back to if that situation, that scenario was tested in the first place. So this is something that's useful. It protects you and ensures that the marketer approves it before it goes live. So this is something very useful. I have a template and I'll take you through that. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so I have already mentioned this to you. So if you have completed the video as well, make sure to remember to mark the video as done to track your progress. Okay, let's get going. So, all right. So what is happening every time when you see this error notification, right? You're probably stressing out, you're freaking out whether you've broken something, you did something wrong with the code, and your email's going to explode, right? We've all been there. So really, I'm going to show you how to really read this, right? Even though it's in a red notification, the color's bright red, something's broken, you can actually really read the error notification and see what is happening, all right? So if we break it down, I've highlighted in the actual error message, you can see that it says, there's an unrecognized expression in some sort of script block, and the script expression is first names, right? So from here, you can see, okay, the first names field is not recognized. So looking at that red notification isn't so bad, right? It actually tells you what is wrong sometimes. And in the second one here, an unrecognized expression. So obviously there's something wrong. It could be the field name or it could be the syntax. And in this case, it looks like it's the syntax. So it's specifically highlighting trims with an S. This function is not recognized, right? And it's showing you in this specific script where you're creating first name trim as a variable equals trims, that this trims function is not recognized. So if you really break it down, take your time to look through the error notification. It does help with you in terms of debugging what's going on. All right, so moving on. So on top of that though, here are some common AMPscript errors that I've personally ran into myself and what I've seen with my other colleagues and my clients. So this is a checklist, a good one to have in the back of your mind. Once you get used to it and you kind of get enough experience, you have this mental checklist in your head that you can just go through and just check every time you see an error to fix up your code. So the first one is definitely probably the most annoying because you don't realize it until later, is that there's probably some missing or incorrect brackets or parentheses, right? So the first one being when you're retrieving data from ascending data extension, make sure to remember you use square brackets and not the parentheses, right? So these are some common mistakes here. Sometimes you're missing one square bracket as well, which I've done for sure, and which results to that error notification. So again, here is a quick fix. Just ensure your brackets and your parentheses are matched. The second component is, yes, incorrect function names. Sometimes you think you can remember the function without looking it up and you just type it straight off the bat, And yes, you run into an error because maybe you thought it was trimmed versus, trim. So that's another common kind of mistake. And here with proper case, like off the bat, looking at that, you think it's fine, but you realize it's missing an R, right? For proper case. So that's a common mistake there. The second one here is improper use of quotation marks. So this is another common one. So again, with strings, you can use either single quotes or double quotes. Make sure if you use either one that it needs to match the other one, which makes sense. Another mistake is that, say for example, you're creating a message variable or some sort of variable that has a string, which includes an apostrophe, like this one, right? So in this scenario, if your message or string does have an apostrophe in it, you need to make sure to use double quotes at the end, right? Double quotes at each end to contain that string. Because if you don't, then Marketing Cloud gets confused as to when's the start and end of the string, right? Which makes sense. Okay, so these are your syntax errors. What you can also run into is runtime errors. So here are the common errors for runtime. So accessing non-existent data or attributes. So this is something that I took you guys through the basic syntax fundamentals video, where you need to make sure that anything in the square brackets, that the field name matches in your sending data extension. If you don't, then you will run into that error where you see that red notification. So this f_name, supposedly to be first name, needs to exist in the sending DE, or else you'll get an error. Undefined variables. So this is a scenario where you're a step ahead. So you didn't retrieve the field name first to set it as a variable, right? So then when you're creating a new variable, when you're using a function, referencing a variable that you didn't previously set, that will run into an error. So in this example here, straight off the bat, we're doing set at first name trim equals trim at first name. But we haven't set the at first name variable yet, right? We need to set it from the sending data extension, retrieve that field, set that as a variable before we can use it in the trim function. So this is one of the common mistakes as well. And finally, invalid function arguments and invalid data types. So for example, when we use the format number function, there's two components, right, in the format number function. It's the first component being the variable that you want to reformat. The second component being the output that you want to reformat it to. So if you use the format number function and you forget that it includes two components, that will error out, right? Which makes sense. Another one being invalid data types. So say for example, you retrieve points, which is a number, and you want to apply a proper case to it. Obviously that doesn't work either, right? So it's important to have the correct data types in terms of numbers and strings when you're using functions as well. Cool. All right, let's move on. So the next one here is debugging techniques. So say for example, you do get that error notification, but the message is so vague that it doesn't really tell you what is happening. And that actually does happen, unfortunately. It's probably the most annoying. So here are some techniques to help debug your code without not knowing what is wrong with it. So the reason why you would do these debugging techniques is because the first one, like I mentioned before, you have vague error messages. So something like, an error occurred while processing your request, please try again later. It doesn't tell you what exactly is happening. It just says there's an error. Yeah, very, very helpful here. There was an error rendering the content, please contact support for assistance. Oh, perfect, easy. SQL error occurred in the email content, please review your code for errors. So yeah, again, you kind of get the point, right? These are very vague error messages. It's so annoying because you get that with SQL as well in Automation Studio. It's probably the most frustrating thing, and you're just trying to figure out what is wrong with your code. So yeah, these are one reasons why. And the other one is, say there's no error notification, but then when you actually preview your email, it's not what you're expecting. Like the variables, they do print out, but it's not the final version that you want to see. So then you need to kind of figure out, okay, what is wrong with my code? Why isn't it working? I created a conditional statement here, or maybe I applied a function here. Why isn't it outputting what I want? So these are the two main things for you to essentially having to debug your code, right? So the first tip here, break down the script. So I've already been teaching you throughout this program that it's always good to have comments in your code, right? Because having comments in your code, by default, you're already breaking down your script. You're consolidating into certain functions, certain purposes, and you can actually see what is happening. So then when you come into a scenario where you see an error, you're easily able to identify, okay, is it this section or this section, by using comments. So using comments, you can actually comment out and make a certain script set as a comment so it doesn't render, and see if the preview email works, if that makes sense. So I'll show you what I mean. So say, for example, anything in this comment tag, right? /* retrieving fields from the sending D */ So everything in between that comment tags won't render in the actual email, right? Because it's seen as a comment. So you can use this technique to actually wrap certain functions in a comment so that it doesn't render, so that you can test whether, if when you preview and test your email, does it actually render and work? Because then if it does, that means there's something wrong with the specific script that you just commented out. So that's the term we use, commented out. So you can comment out certain bits of your code to see if that was the issue. Because if your email will then is able to preview and test, that means whatever you commented out has the issue. So let's go through the actual example. Say, for example, I'm in this email. All right. So I'm going to preview and test this. So there should be an error if I set this up correctly. Okay, so we see an error here. So obviously with this one, it kind of tells you, what is wrong with it. But say, for example, this was a vague error message and you just had to, kind of figure out what is going wrong with your code. So if we go back into content, go into our code snippet, this is how you kind of edit out certain sections or comment out certain sections to see if that's the reason. So the first step is, let me kind of comment out this subject line variable to see if it still renders. Okay, so doing that means that this no longer renders in the AMPscript code and it's just ignored. So if I preview and I still have the error, it means that it wasn't that piece of line or script. It must be something else, right? So let me preview and test. Okay, so I still get the error notification. So it's not that bit of script. Okay, that's good to know. So let me uncomment that, keep that in there. Let's comment out something else. So I have this logic for first name cleaning here. Okay, so let me comment out maybe, this whole entire section. Like so. So now this whole thing doesn't render. Let's see what happens. Save, preview and test. Oh. Let's see what happens. Okay, so my email actually is able to be previewed. So the notification, the error notification is gone. So that tells me, okay, there is something wrong with this bit of code here. So you kind of see where I'm going at. You slowly break down, comment out each section. Okay, so let me comment out the last two, like so. So that means this whole 2 lines, 10, 11, are commented out. And let's preview our code. Okay, so we're still seeing the error. So then you realize it must be between something along lines 8 or 9, right? So then when you really do review the code again, that's where you pick it up. Okay, so obviously this trim function is incorrect. Remove that and we should be good to go. So that's how you kind of slowly break down bit by bit. If it's not obvious in terms of where the error is, it will help you identify which section of the script is causing the error, and it will help you to fix the code and preview what you want to preview in the email. So now this is all fixed up. We know that the trim function was the one that's causing the error, and yeah, now it's solved. So this is just an example of how you use comments to help kind of debug your code, and it's something that I use day to day, especially in cloud pages later on when you get very technical in building processing pages. But yeah, for email scripts like this, this is something that's very useful. Cool, let's move on. So that's tip 1. The second tip here is actually using output statements. So this is something, to be honest, I personally don't do too much, but it is something useful if you really need to see where your variables are and what the values of the variables are that's causing the error in the final output. So using output, it allows you to actually print the variables at different stages of your script, and it actually prints it out at the location of your code snippet. So you can actually see before you do certain transformations or certain functions, what the value of that variable is, and to see where the mistake is, where the gap is in terms of the actual output towards the email to what you're expecting the value to be, right? So the syntax is very simple. All you need to do is just write output. And in terms of the output function, you do need to concatenate some sort of like fixed string or variable before, and then print the actual variable that you want to preview. So in this case, say for example, first name variable is the variable that I want to print out. Then I just say, first name concatenate as a string. So then when you see it in the preview and test, you can see, okay, so this variable is corresponding to this first name kind of field. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if you just simply copy and paste this and paste it in here, like so. So say I just retrieved the first name value. I want to print out output concat first name and literally the same first name variable like so. If I preview, let that load. And there we go. So you can see, okay, before the data is transformed, it's done its trimming, it's done its proper casing. This was the initial value. So you kind of trace your steps, right? Okay, cool. So that's James. Where can I print out now? So after that, let's say I want to see what my variable is. Oh, that's random. Slash there. Let's print it out here. And I want to print out first name trim in this case. Click save, preview. Okay, so it still looks the same because maybe this record doesn't have any spaces, but you kind of get the point, right? You can just print out certain variables just to see where it might have gone wrong. Let's do uppercase, print out the uppercase variable, like so. So you can do it step by step, really identify in what areas in terms of the variables, if it's not resulting to the final output that you're expecting, follow kind of the breadcrumbs rather, at each step. So maybe you're applying multiple functions to transform it. You can see the value as it applies each function to kind of trace back where it's going wrong. So in this case, it's all in uppercase. So yeah, you guys get the point. But again, I think the most useful one is definitely the commenting out technique. That's the one that I use all the time. So I definitely recommend doing that. Cool. Let's move on. So, let me just expand that. Cool. So the next one is how to unit test. So this can be boring because no one really wants to do documentation, right? But it is something that's required, and you probably run into this situation where you do work at a company where you're kind of building a bigger project. You don't have to do it for these exercises that you'll have in the next videos, but if you're working with a company that's a big journey launch or big campaign, big email, you do want to have the proper documentation, which is essentially your evidence that you have tested this, so then you won't get in trouble by your manager, right? Or the client or the marketer. And it's also on the marketer and manager to kind of review your testing document, confirm all the scenarios that you've tested, and give the final approval, so then we can go live with the campaign. So if any mistakes happen in the future, it's really on them because they reviewed the documentation and they gave you the green light, right? So why do we need to unit test? Basically what I just said to you ensures comprehensive testing. So it gives you confidence yourself that you've tested every scenario. It acts as an approval documentation. This is that's going to save you in case something happens down the line, because it's approved by someone senior, someone on the upper hand. Then any mistakes happen, it's on them, really. It facilitates reproducing testing. So say, for example, you do another campaign, all your test cases are there. A test case simply represents a certain scenario that a customer can experience with that specific campaign or email. And you can reproduce the tests, which makes it easier. It provides accountability and traceability. So it shows who conducts the test, who approves the test. And again, it's just a traceable document. And finally, it protects consultants and developers. So it protects us. So you guys should really consider doing this, because in a scenario where it does error out once it goes live, you'll have your manager maybe blaming you or your colleagues blaming you, saying, oh, you've made a mistake. And obviously that's not good, right? So make sure you create some testing documentation. And I actually have a template for you. So it's not too hard. I'll take you through how you can do a decent documentation to really protect you in your career. Cool. So this is what a testing documentation looks like. This is something I personally created that I use at my work. Everyone kind of has a different style, but generally follows this kind of layout, right? So at the top here, you have just some standard kind of documentation data in terms of like what campaign you're testing, who is the tester, who's the approver, and the approval date, right? So you kind of use this to kind of protect you and submit once you go live. You have, the test case number, the test record. So this is usually like the subscriber key. So in the scenario, when you hand this over to someone else, maybe they can do a second QA. They can click this specific test record, preview the email, and see if the results or the expected outcome matches with yours or matches with your status, your test status. So in terms of your test status, obviously there's pass, fail, or not applicable. In your test case description, this is where you describe what you want to test, right? The scenario that you want to test. So in this case, a bronze customer that has a first name in all lowercase. So obviously for a record like that, you're expecting that the first name is cleaned up, it's in proper case, and the loyalty tier is correctly populated in terms of being in all lowercase, if that's what you want to test, or just populating in the actual subject line. So in this case, the subject line is purely just, hi James, congrats on your bronze membership. And if that's the expected outcome by the marketer or your manager or your client, then that's a pass. Set it as pass and put your screenshot in there for evidence, and that's it. So you document your process. And in a situation where it does error out, you can, go back to the marketer, say, okay, this situation errored out. I'll need to go back and fix up the code. Or you just go back and fix up the code and don't submit this until everything is passed, right? It's really up to you. It's just more for traceability. Or maybe you're doing a peer QA. So say, for example, you built it, you pass it on to someone else and they do this testing documentation. Then you'll flag certain things that are failing the test case and you hand it back to the original developer or builder for them to fix up. And you kind of add your comments in here. That's pretty much it, guys. So I have a template for you in the description on the resource link below. You can download that and use that. Feel free to use that for any of your kind of testing in the future. It's pretty easy to do. In terms of how to create that test case, it's really straightforward. As long as you understand the requirements, you can kind of think or figure out what needs to be tested. So say, for example, you built something where you're doing a trim and proper case to the first name field, right? So then you know that you need to test with a record that has spaces and a record that doesn't have their first name in proper case. So you can see whether whether your code is working. So that's pretty much the idea. Once you at least have some sort of test cases mapped out, then you can provide it to the marketer or client as well. Because it is really on them to kind of confirm and provide you with the final approval. So if there's certain test cases that maybe you've missed, it's on them to add on to ensure that you've tested this and ensure that whatever is built meets those requirements. So yeah, provide a copy of the testing documentation for them to review, and they can always add additional test cases. Make sure they don't add additional functionality that is not in the original scope. So that's another thing. Make sure they don't do that. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the video, guys. So this is the summary. Again, don't be afraid of that red notification. It can be alarming at first, but take some time to read it. Maybe it tells you what's wrong with your code. If it doesn't, if it's too vague, here are some common AMPscript errors you can actually go through. Have that checklist with you, and soon once you get more experience, it'll be in your mind, a mental checklist. So you can go through, okay, maybe it's a wrong function, maybe I have the wrong syntax here, or whatever it is, and it helps you debug your code a lot quicker. In terms of the debugging techniques, I think commenting out the section is probably the most useful one. I use it today. And if you really need to, you can use the output function as well, just to see what the value of your variables are. And finally, unit testing. I mean, we just went through it. Unit testing is probably most important. It protects you. It's good for documentation. And yeah, in any scenario where there is errors, whoever approved it is on them, really. And then you kind of work together to solve it. But yeah. Cool, that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you. If you do like this content, again, please follow me at VinCodes on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok. I do release some exclusive content there in terms of my day in the life as a Salesforce Marketing Cloud consultant, tips and tricks, some AMPscript Academy videos, so feel free to check that out. If you haven't already, please leave me a testimonial. We're towards the end of the week 1 module, so I'm really curious to see how you guys are going, your learning journey, your experience. Let me know, give me feedback, and you can win a special prize. And that's pretty much it, guys. Let's grow the community. If you've gone through the week 1 module so far and you've enjoyed it, please share it with anyone else that you know that may be interested in leveling up their skill sets with AMPscript, and it will mean a lot. Let's grow this community together. And yeah, that's it, guys. Next video is the sample brief exercises. Good luck, and I'll see you there.